My great pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Euline Cutrim Schmid, full professor at the moment based at Schwäbische Gmünd University. Yeah, I've been practicing just to be able to pronounce that. For a long time based in Heidelberg, Pädagogische Hochschule Heidelberg. Well, a big thank you to the organizers for having given me the privilege of introducing both plenary speakers, afternoon speakers, Euline and Shona Whyte, Dr. Shona Whyte from the University of Nice in France. Well, I'm talking about both of them because they make a perfect team. They collaborate a lot. They've been working together for years. And to me, they serve as a living proof that collaboration is a extremely powerful source. Together you can do much more than individually. Well, we met for the first time. We met with Euline like 4 years ago, 5 years perhaps. And my first impression was, well, she's a charming person. But then she gave her presentation and oh my God, that was something. So full of energy, so full of passion. And this energy is seen in Euline's work. She's leading, together with Shona, the Eurocall Special Interest Group on Teacher Education. And they just completed their first workshop, am I right, in Nice. She is an author of numerous publications in the field of interactive technologies and teacher training, and she's a great expert in interactive whiteboards. As we all know, interactive whiteboards are, well, omnipresent at Polish schools, but few people know what to do with them. So she's the right person to ask. And, well, there are lots of publications around, and her newest, Euline and Shona's newest monograph, edited monograph, is just out. And it's on interactive technologies again. So if you're interested, well, you can get hold of it somehow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Dr. Euline Cutrim Schmid, over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Nosha, for this nice introduction. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. It was very kind of you to invite me for this plenary speech. So I'm very glad to be in Poland for the first time. So yeah, thank you very much, first of all. Yes, I have conducted extensive research on the topic interactive whiteboards in language education. But today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different. So the title of my presentation, Bridging the Gap Between School and University in Call Teacher Education. I think this title fits very well the theme of this conference. I'm actually going to talk about a project, a longitudinal project that I have been conducting since 2008. And I'm basically investigating my pre-service call course or call seminar. I consider it very innovative because I incorporate an element of collaboration between pre-service and in-service teachers. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. Okay? Okay. So what does the research say about pre-service teacher education in call? We have talked a little bit about this this morning during the first keynote speech, that teachers usually, especially beginning teachers, feel insufficiently prepared to integrate new technologies in their teaching. So basically they are not being adequately prepared to cope with the complex demands of the school system. They show low confidence in using technology for teaching. And when they overcome all the initial challenges and start using technology, normally they use them in qualitatively inferior ways. So this is what the research has seen. Why does this happen? Because normally call courses like the one I offer at my university, they tend to focus too much on the mastery of hardware and software functions and not so much on pedagogy. And sometimes even these hardware and software functions are very different from what we find in schools. So COL courses are disconnected to the real world of schools. So this is one of the issues that we need to consider as educators or COL educators. Some interesting approaches have been suggested in the literature to try to solve this problem. One of them would be integrating technology into general methodology courses. So we would use technology for teaching all courses at university, so we wouldn't have a special COL seminar focusing on computer-assisted language learning, but we would have technology integrated in all our courses. This is a wonderful proposal. Another proposal would be to train university faculty, people like me, and school mentors to provide adequate models for pre-service teachers, so that they could see what's happening and then they could afterwards apply similar methodologies in their teaching. Another suggestion would be providing more field-based courses or school-based courses to promote the creation of authentic, technology-rich field experiences in primary and secondary schools. And this is exactly what I'm doing in my project. So field providing pre-service teachers with opportunities for field-based experiences in schools. There have been some studies investigating the transfer of COL coursework into classroom teaching. And they have found that these technology courses that we offer at university level, they have very limited impact on how teachers think about technology, what they think about technology, and how they integrate technology into their teaching. So they have seen that peer collaboration in situated learning contexts have play a much bigger role if teachers are provided with this opportunity. And teachers also need to gather sufficient evidence of the positive effects of technology-enhanced teaching. They have to see the results of technology in use. And so this is something that has been pointed out in the literature. Also, the literature emphasizes the important role played by proficient mentor teachers, because it's not enough to have our students, our pre-service teachers, going to schools if they don't have the opportunity to work with mentor teachers who are technologically proficient. For example, the research done by Brown and Warshauer in America has found that those pre-service teachers who, during their placements in schools, had the opportunity to work with technologically proficient mentor teachers, they were more likely to use new technologies later on when they started teaching and had a permanent position. It's also important, according to many researchers, to identify, acknowledge, and deal with fears while our trainees, our pre-service teachers, are still within a supportive environment. Because afterwards they are on their own, so it would be important to deal with these fears while they're still working with us. So we have some interesting examples in the literature of successful collaborative projects involving pre-service and in-service teachers. One of these examples presented by or reported by Meskel et al. 2006. They have conducted longitudinal work as well with pre-service, in-service, and PhD students working together collaboratively to design, implement, and evaluate classroom-based projects or lessons. And they evaluated this as an opportunity for very important collaboration and a ripe venue for constructive, collaborative, and productive exchanges, because the pre-service teachers would bring their fresh technological knowledge, and the in-service teachers, or also the theoretical knowledge, because they've just done their courses at university, so they have fresh theoretical knowledge and technological knowledge, and the in-service teachers with pedagogical knowledge and practical knowledge, and the PhD students also evaluating together with them what was happening. So, so this was a very interesting project that they developed, and that was the starting point for my own research when I found out what they had done. And in Germany also we have some examples of research using the principles of research-oriented pre-service teacher education, where Legutike et al., for example, investigated pre-service teachers implementing telecollaboration projects in schools. We also had to do some kind of action research, going to schools and doing telecollaboration. So the results have been very promising, and that's why, as I already said, I decided to use the same approach. But so far, there hasn't been so much discussion about the specific competencies that these teachers are actually developing in this, during this collaborative project. So that's what I wanted to investigate. Self-efficacy, also a very important aspect in pre-service called teacher education. Teachers with higher levels of self-efficacy tend to be more likely to use technology later on when they start teaching. So how do you define teacher self-efficacy? I think most of you already know, but I will just read it for you. Individual teachers' beliefs in their own ability to plan, organize, and carry out activities that are required to attain given educational goals. So basically what they believe they can do. And this has a big impact on what they will actually do. Okay. Research investigating the development of teachers' self-efficacy beliefs in pre-teacher or in call teacher education in general is still limited, but there are some interesting studies that are being conducted at the moment and have been conducted recently. So I have some examples here for you. This PowerPoint will be online, so you can follow, you can take a look later on. The references are there. So researchers have been emphasizing the importance of conceptualizing call pre-service teacher education courses in ways that provide pre-service teachers with opportunities to develop or to develop mastery experiences, so that they can see the real results of technology in use. And that they can also gather sufficient evidence of the positive effects of technology-enhanced teaching. Okay, and then Bandura, because I'm using the self-efficacy framework in my work. So he says the 4 main factors influencing teachers' beliefs about their capability of succeeding on particular tasks are mastery experiences. So they have to develop these genuine mastery experiences. They have to have experiences of successful teaching, and then they will believe that they can do more. Also vicarious experiences. So if they observe someone succeeding, they are more likely to develop self-efficacy as well, because they can see that someone else was able to do that specific task. Also, positive feedback or encouragement tends to increase self-efficacy, and negative feedback tends to weaken perceptions of teaching competence. And analyzing the teaching task is also important. So reflective practice is a very important element, a very important component in the development of self-efficacy beliefs. And this is also an aspect, there was a very important aspect in my own research when I used reflective practice, as we will see later on. Okay, so I already talked a little bit about the main motivation for my work and what has been pointed out in the literature. What was my personal motivation to carry out this project? My motivation was based on the feedback I got from my students, and this feedback here represents very well their general ideas or their general feedback regarding the call seminar that I offered at my university. This was in 2006. That's when I got this feedback from one of my students. We call students do not have the opportunity to practice our knowledge about new media in the classroom in a real class situation. We know all about it, but we are not able to experience it in class, and how media is accepted by the students and which problems may appear. So this is not only one student who said that, several students. This was an online discussion we had about the course, and I got some feedback, and several students said the same thing. So I thought something has to be changed in the seminar. So I decided to incorporate, as I said, this component of collaboration. So I'm now investigating a model or a format of call pre-service course that incorporates collaborative exchanges between in-service and pre-service teachers. How? First of all, I invite teachers, in-service teachers, to come to the seminar to share examples of technology use, real examples of technology use, so projects they have developed in schools with videos, etc., so that they can see how teachers work in real schools. And the students who need a graded shine, the students who need a credit for this course, they are supposed to develop small-scale research projects in schools. So they have to go to school to observe a specific teacher teaching first, and then check what kinds of technologies they are using, or how they teach. And then they have to get together with this teacher and then develop at least 4 technology-enhanced lessons, and then they have to evaluate these lessons. And how do they evaluate the lessons? They are going to video record the lessons, they can administer questionnaires to the pupils, they get the feedback of the teacher, so they have they're going to use several tools to be able to analyze or to evaluate these lessons. And I always say the minimum 4 lessons, and they have to be connected into a teaching unit. So that's what they have to do if they need a credit. If they don't need a credit, then they don't have to do that, because it's lots of work for our students. So nobody would do my seminar if everybody had to do that. But ideally, it should have been like this, so that all of them would do that. Fortunately, I work at a University of Education, a Pädagogische Hochschule in Germany, which means we have very close collaboration with schools. You might be wondering, how do you find these mentor teachers? Our students have to do their practicum or practica, several practica during their degree, and because of that we have mentor teachers who work together with them, and I can choose some of these mentor teachers and invite them, those who know about technology, to work together with my students. So what are the research questions in this project? What was the perceived impact of the situated call teacher education program on the pre-service teachers' acquisition of call-related teaching competencies? So I'm here talking about perceived impact. I'm talking about perceptions, because I only collected data on perceptions. Through interviews, I'm going to tell you more about the research methodology later on. And also the perceived impact of the situated call teacher education program on the pre-service teachers' development of self-efficacy beliefs. I interviewed them in the beginning, before they actually implemented the projects in school, the school-based project. So I interviewed them, and then I could find out about their self-efficacy beliefs. I didn't use questionnaires to do that. I could have done that. Probably I will start doing it because I'm still doing this project. As I said, it's longitudinal, and I want to continue it as long as I live, maybe. Okay. Yes. Okay, at least as long as I'm working at the university. So another important question: which elements of the professional development program were especially beneficial in facilitating and supporting the pre-service teachers' pedagogical learning? Because since I'm working with this format or this model, I want to help other people who also intend to carry out similar projects. So I need to find out what are the specific guidelines or principles that we have to take into account for in order to be able to implement successful collaboration between in-service and pre-service teachers, because they think very differently, and there are many challenges that they have to overcome together. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this later. Okay, so 2008, 2014, so far. I'm analyzing my call or evaluating my call seminar or investigating my call seminar. Basically, this is an introductory course. I usually include several topics, not only, one specific topic. Ideally, I should go into more depth into one topic, but it's just an introductory course. So normally we have 5 topics, and they change depending on what is more interesting for the students. So for example, interactive whiteboards, Web 2.0 tools, language learning software, web quests, and topics like this. So they basically have to develop an understanding of how new media can enhance language instruction. I use the task-based language learning or language teaching as the main pedagogical framework. So if they design those lessons, they have to use this approach, they have to use this pedagogical framework, and they only do it if they need a shine, or in German, a shine, but it's credit, basically. So far, 23 pre-service and 9 in-service teachers have agreed to take part in the project. Of course, I had many more students who did the projects, the school-based projects, but those who accepted to work together with me to be interviewed, because there are several interviews also that allowed me to use their research reports as data. So these are the ones. And I must say I have enough data. I have so much data that I can't really look at. So research instruments, in-depth interviews with pre-service and in-service teachers. All the lessons are video recorded. I also conduct video-triggered reflective sessions with the students, so we look at their lessons together, and then they can make comments on their lessons or on what went well and what didn't go so well, so that they can reflect on their lessons together with me. I try not to guide them too much, but this is not always so easy. I also use the research reports that they have to produce. They have to produce, in the past, 5,000 word papers. Now they produce 3,000 word papers for the purpose of this course. Okay, the theoretical framework that I use for the analysis of the data. I look at the competencies that they have developed, or they perceived as having developed, and these are the competencies based on the framework developed by Hubbard and Levy 2006. So they have a list of competencies that our pre-service teachers should develop in this kind of contexts. One of them would be making informed judgments on the suitability of the tool for the task. So, for example, all kinds of language learning goals may appropriately include the use of chats. When do you use chats for which kind of learning goals? Or also knowing how to appreciate the strengths and limitations of the technological options at hand. For example, in which phases of a lesson do I use an interactive whiteboard? In which phases of a lesson I should definitely not use an interactive whiteboard? And these are competencies that sometimes our teachers or pre-service teachers do not have. I also use the teacher self-efficacy model for the analysis, as I already talked about the major factors affecting the development of self-efficacy. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit about the results of the project. So I'm looking at the impact of this model on the development of core-related teaching competencies. Now, this is the first part. Of course, here I only chose some quotes, but they are representative of the data that I have collected. One of the aspects that has been emphasized by the pre-service teachers is that the school-based projects helped to deepen their understandings of the potential of technology for enhancing language learning, or the specific technology that they were using. So, for example, this teacher says, Helen, she says, yes, I think in the call seminar, you just saw what you can do with the whiteboard. But it's a difference because the whiteboard is the electronic whiteboard. But it's a difference because here you have pupils and you want them to learn something. So you have to implement the whiteboard in this way that they learn something. Not just using the whiteboard because you want to show nice pictures or films or using the internet. There has to be some learning background behind it. And this is very interesting because in my call seminar, the students are supposed to do peer teaching. I mean, in the past, they used to do peer teaching. They still do a little bit of peer teaching. They have to design lessons that have clear learning goals, and they have to teach their fellow students. But they don't take this teaching endeavor so seriously because they think I'm not actually teaching anything, and they focus too much on the tool because they want to exploit it as much as possible, but not on learning. And at this point, the pre-service teacher is saying, now I have to think about the pupils. I have to think about their learning. And this makes a big difference in terms of how I'm going to design my lessons and implement my lessons. Also, another aspect that was emphasized by the students is the fact that the projects help them to redirect the focus from themselves as technology users and their performance and their roles as teachers. So redirecting the focus from themselves and their performance as technology users to the pupils and their language learning. Because of course, as I said before, they are students at a university working with technology. They have to show that they have understood technology to its full potential. So this is a tension that they usually face. So here, for example, Johanna says, I asked her about the challenges that she faced in this specific project that she developed. And she said, a challenge was teaching in a more learner-centered way. That was kind of a bit difficult for me because I thought, okay, that whiteboard is so cool, and as a technology learner, I have to try out all the features the whiteboard has. And then I thought, okay, I mustn't forget about the pupils because they might fall asleep while I try out myself, right? So this is interesting because here you can see this tension between the technology user and the teacher. So I have to show how much I know. I have to exploit the technology as much as possible, but I can't forget the pupils. I can't, otherwise they will not learn anything. So they stop looking so much at themselves as technology users and start looking at the pupils and their needs. Another aspect emphasized by the students was the fact that the project helped them to increase their self-efficacy after they were able to reach mastery experiences, so successful teaching. They could see their teaching was successful. And this relates to Bandura's framework. This Krista says, so I have to say, if I had only been in the seminar, in the call seminar, and hadn't done the project, then I think I wouldn't do it, I think. I asked her if she would, after she gets a permanent position, if she would still use new technology. So this was a question I asked all my students in the interviews. Would you still use new technology? And then she says, I don't think I wouldn't if I had done only the call seminar. Because you see how it could work, but you don't see how it really works. So I think the project is really good because you do it on your own and see the problems for the first time. And now if I do it again, I know the problems and I know the challenges that will wait for me. And I feel better prepared now. So this student, for example, I'm giving lots of examples of students who used interactive whiteboards because I worked with lots of mentors who were integrating whiteboards in their teaching, and that's why they welcomed our students. This student, for example, was doing her practicum at a school where they had one interactive whiteboard, and she was very excited about the technology. So, but she couldn't use the whiteboard because it was completely forgotten in a corner somewhere. And so she was really upset because she couldn't understand why they wouldn't use such an interesting piece of technology. So she talked to the technician, nobody could help her. So she found out how to kind of bring whiteboard to life again. She bought new cables for the whiteboard, updated the software, the smart software, notebook software, and she managed to get the whiteboard working. And all the teachers were very surprised. And she gave some training to the teachers, and she did her project. And then after that, she thought, if I manage to do that, I can do anything. So if I manage to get this whiteboard to work, if I have any challenges in my future position, I will manage to overcome them. So this idea of self-efficacy, she believes that she can do it because she solved the problems herself. And I wasn't there to help because I'm not actually in the school. I have access to the students because I help them with the research part of the project because they need to know how to design a questionnaire, how to define a research question, things like that. But I don't work with them in school, so I couldn't help her. Also, the students said they had their motivation increased after evaluating the impact of technology on teaching and learning. So they could actually see the results. So this student says, I wanted to observe what effect my teaching had, if it was effective, if the use of the interactive whiteboard was effective to teach the children something. Yeah. Or if it was just a nice thing to have. They were amused and everything was fine, and next lesson they don't remember anything. So for this, so for this student, the project was important because she could have the possibility to actually see the difference that the whiteboard would make in terms of learning. So I think this was important, and this was also important in redesigning the whole approach, because in the beginning the students could just teach some lessons, 4 lessons, but they didn't have to be united in a teaching unit. So they could teach random lessons. So during a month they could go once a week, and then in this case they couldn't really see the pupils' development, their progress as they were teaching. So then we changed that, and then we started having this approach of designing a teaching unit together with the teacher and really seeing the progress of the pupils, because we noticed that for the pre-service teachers it was very important for them to follow this development, because they wanted to see the results of their teaching and how, mainly the difference that the technology made, because they needed to believe in the technology. And we had many students who, for example, with the whiteboard, they would not believe that you could use this technology, for example, in the primary context. And they would tell me, I think this is very nice, but I don't think I could use this in the primary context. And then they did the project, and then things changed, because they could see, yes, it's also possible in the primary context. So this was also important. Now we can talk a little bit about the elements that facilitated the pre-service teachers' learning. So I already mentioned the vicarious experiences. So seeing people succeed can help you to increase your self-efficacy. So the in-service teachers model technology-enriched instruction. This was not always like that, but many of the mentors were good models for them. Also, verbal persuasions. In-service teachers provided feedback on the design and implementation of electronic materials. They were constantly working with them and providing feedback on the materials they developed. So, for example, here, Helen says, I said, what did you learn from the teacher? I wanted to know exactly how these teachers were helping them. And she said, I learned to think about how I can use the software, in this case would be the whiteboard software, effectively. So I chose many examples with the whiteboard because I wanted, my examples in the videos are also whiteboard so that we have a unit here. So she said, I use the software effectively so that the students are not overwhelmed with pictures or material. I put a lot of thought in how you work effectively with the whiteboard. You have to think about what is good for their eyes and what is good and what size of the writing is appropriate. All these things, I think. So here, the teacher provided feedback on very practical things in terms of how much the pupils can cope with in terms of the amount of input that they would get during a lesson. So these are things that our beginning teachers would know because they don't have the teaching experience, of course. So these were elements that were extremely helpful. Also, this practical aspects of technology integration, of how to make your presentations more fitter for your audience. Okay, so now we are going to look at a short video of a lesson, because I want to show you a moment when the in-service teacher, the mentor, provides the pre-service teacher with some kind of feedback on what he's doing. So the in-service teachers provided feedback on the design of materials, as you already saw in the quote, but they also provided feedback during the lessons when the pre-service teachers were teaching, sometimes they were interrupted by the mentors and they provided feedback, oh no, please don't do that, or to make sure that their pupils would learn because they wanted their pupils to learn. So here we have, this is one page of file, an interactive whiteboard file, and for this lesson, the teacher was focusing on the topic hobbies. So they were talking about what kinds of activities that people like to do. And they were practicing the third person singular in contrast to the other ones. No? So, and then the student teacher was a very techno-savvy student. He decided to design something called an error detector, which means that if you place, I can't do it now because this is just a snapshot, but if you place these sentences on the error detector, if there is a mistake, then the word that is wrong will disappear. So the pupils would know there is a mistake, and then they have to move this sentence to the red box. So if there is no mistake, they move it to the green box. And the student said that he designed this error detector because he wanted to make his lesson more interesting, fun for the pupils, like creating a magical effect that would motivate the pupils to come to the board and do something. And now we take a look at the video, and then you can see. So you can see, and then afterwards we can talk about it.
You have to check. If you think this is right, pass it through the detector and see. Oh. What is this? Yeah, there is a mistake. So the sentence is wrong.
Yes, because I'm reading the red part, it's wrong something.
No, wait, just one at a time. You have to wait till.
So
Yeah,
the red field.
here, it's wrong. Okay, thank you.
But it's wrong. Because Ina right?
Could you please correct the mistake? Correct mistake. There's something wrong in this sentence. So another. Hello? Here, for example. Show me where the mistake is. Correct it. You can help.
It's a grammar mistake. It's not a. It's right that they go swimming, but it's a grammar mistake. It's a grammar mistake. It's a grammar mistake. It's right that they go swimming, but what is too much?
There's a little mistake in the sentence. Yeah, okay. Just cross it out. Oops. Mark it.
Okay. Let's go back to the. Okay, so the most important thing here is not what the student actually did, but the kind of reflection that took place after this this sequence. So the student identified the sequence as a critical incident, because this was also a framework that they used for the analysis of their teaching, critical incidents. So they looked at unusual situations in their teaching, or moments when unexpected things happened, moments when they thought the pupils learned really a lot, or when they didn't learn, or when they thought there were some difficulties, and this was one of the moments. And this is what the student said. He said, at this moment I had to leave the idea of an observer behind and ask them why exactly some sentences were right and some were wrong, and they just guessed. Perhaps these were the flashy technical effects Gage, who's an author, warned about, and the pupils were only distracted by the error detector. So the student said that in this case the teacher was very helpful because she was the person who triggered this critical incident, because he hadn't realized that the pupils were more excited about the error detector or the whole thing on the board than actually looking at the sentence, trying to evaluate, to analyze them. They just wanted to do something on the board, and he didn't realize that. He said later on in the interview that he wanted to this lesson to be as learner-centered as possible, so he wanted to step back and let them do the activity on their own, because he had designed the error detector, so the error detector was doing his job. And the teacher reminded him, no, the error detector is not doing your job. You have to ask them to explain why they're doing what they're doing. And so this was a moment when the student realized that maybe he was doing exactly what one of the authors he read had warned him, warned us about, that we shouldn't let these magical effects and distract learners from learning. So I think this was an important element in the development of this student, who used this experience, the school-based experience, to develop further as a call practitioner. This is an example of reflective practice, and this was actually done via interviews, because they were reflecting about their teaching in many ways, but also through the video simulated recall, when they had to look at their lessons. So I have 10 minutes. Okay, a lot of time. That's great. Okay, so when they had to analyze their lessons through the video simulated reflection, this was a very important moment for the students to think about specific elements of their teaching. But it was very difficult to get them to actually pay attention to pedagogy. That's what we always talk about. They were pretty much focusing a lot on the tool. So for example, here I have a sequence of one of these sessions, and one of the interviewer, I asked the student, okay, and what were your impressions of the lesson afterwards, after you taught the lesson? What were the highlights of the lesson and the things that didn't work so well, or you would have done differently? And then the student says, as I said before, I had to switch program. That was not good. I wouldn't do that again. I would try to have the sound file on the computer or on the stick, and then create another link so I don't have to switch between the programs. So this is just an example of a very typical type of session when it was very difficult for me to get the students to kind of redirect them to pedagogical elements and try to get them to forget about the tool a little bit. They were constantly thinking about all the technological aspects of the lesson. So I always try to know, but think about this, what about this? So that's why I told you in the beginning that it's not so easy to just shut up and not say much. Because I wanted them to reflect on their teaching, but I also wanted to trigger some more high-level reflection. So in this case, at the end of the session, the teachers, not at the end of the session, but a little bit further after I had been trying to redirect her focus, she says, sorry, I think I'm focusing too much on myself as a whiteboard learner and not so much on the pupils learning with the whiteboard. So she realized herself that, oh, okay, sorry, I can see your point, what you're trying to get me to think. Okay, and the students, so apart from, the interviews were tools used for them to reflect, the the simulated recall sessions were also used by them to reflect, but also the research reports. They had to write a 5,000 word paper at the beginning, so a long paper, and nowadays 3,000 word paper, so they have a lot, they had to write a lot, so this was also important for their reflective practice. Okay, so here I have another, can I still show another short video? Okay, good. So let me see. Okay, so I have another lesson now, and this lesson focuses on storytelling, also with the whiteboard. So this student...
London is very big.
This student wanted to use the whiteboard to facilitate storytelling in the primary school, but another aim was to make storytelling more interactive. She thought, okay, I use the whiteboard, it will be more interactive and also more learner-centered. It was very important for her, so it has to be learner-centered and interactive. So we can take a look.
Very, very big horse. Grandma, Katie, and her little brother Jack take a red double-decker bus to see London. Okay, Grandma, Katie, and Jack, they go in here on the red double-decker bus. They want to see London because London is wonderful. Okay? Come on. Let's do. That's so interesting. Look at the little paper, and I ask you a question now. Zoe, go on the board and circle the bus. Circle the bus. Circle the bus. Tempo. Musst du nicht übersetzen. Ja, steht immer auf alles vorzubereiten, Julian. Okay, take a different color and circle red, Mark, Katie, and Jack. Very good. Now point at the word double-decker bus. Point at the word. The word. The word for. Does she point at it? Very good. Okay, sit down. Okay, now we are London.
Okay, so go back. You're almost finishing. Okay, here. Okay. In this case, you can see the teacher uses the board as a presentation device, so the story is there, and she gave some small cards to the students with some directions, so commands. So the pupils were supposed to tell each other, go to the board, circle this. So that's what she understood by learner-centered, so that the pupils would tell each other what to do with the page, yeah? or to underline something, or to translate something, or whatever. Yeah? So that's how she understood it. And then later on, she realized that actually this approach that she used was actually, again, distracting the pupils from the story itself, and this element of interaction that she understood as interaction was not actually leading to aspects of understanding the story. So it was not helping the pupils to understand the story, but was actually distracting them from the story. And her aim was to tell the story and not to work with those specific elements on the page. So and then that's what she wrote on her report. And again, I didn't talk to her, so it was really her own reflection on what had happened. Sorry, it's very long, but I just want to bring everything because I found it was it was contextualized. The students enjoyed listening to the story, but did not want to interact with it on the whiteboard all the time. They just wanted to listen to the story and felt interrupted by the teacher, asking them to direct their fellow students to manipulate the story's content. They faced the problem that they did not only have to cope with the new content being presented to them, but also had to think about what the directions meant to transfer them into a physical action. So again, here the idea of cognitive load during the activity. Moreover, the directions did not make sense to the student and were not personally meaningful. Again, the idea of do they help me to understand the story or not? The storytelling was paused, causing difficulties in realizing a consistent line of events. So I found this interesting because it was, again, a critical incident that she found, and then she was reflecting on what she had done wrong, because she was very upset because the pupils were not extremely interested, falling asleep, as you noticed, during the storytelling, and they love storytelling. So she didn't understand why are they so upset. And the interesting thing is that she didn't even realize that before she designed the task that we could have thought that this would happen, but she didn't realize, only afterwards. So so I'm concluding, so I'm good in time, so I'm fine, very good. So we have time for questions, great. So The student teachers especially emphasize the important role of this school-based experience in allowing them to, first of all, use technology in authentic language teaching scenarios, real pupils learning real stuff, evaluate the impact of technology on language teaching and learning. So this was an aspect that they really emphasized. I need to know the effects. I need to know how much they learn, if it really makes sense. And also reach genuine mastery experiences, so successful experiences. And I think even when it wasn't very successful, but they found out what went wrong, and they could see the point, what else they could have done, then it also made a difference, even if it wasn't successful. So that's my idea as well. So the student teachers benefited directly also from the collaboration with the school mentors, as we have seen. They model technology and reach instruction in their classrooms. I couldn't give any examples, but this is the case. By the way, this presentation here has been summarized in an article that will be published in Recall in September. So if you have interest, you can read it. But I have more data. I can write another chapter, so no problem, if I need. So they provided feedback, as you could see, on the design implementation and of materials, and also encouraged and supported reflective practice. So in this research, I could identify key aspects of their learning processes. So I couldn't say really, the scope of this project cannot, cannot evaluate to what extent they are going to use technology when they start teaching. So that's, I can't say that because I haven't investigated these teachers in school and to what extent they are actually going to use. Now, I can talk about their learning processes during the call seminar, but this is an idea for a follow-up study. So I want to to write questionnaires and then try to find out what's happening to these students now that they have their position. So this is something that maybe we can think about, Shona, for another project. So also patterns of competence development, how they developed these competences and the elements that facilitated these processes. And I hope that these findings can inform the design and implementation of core language teacher education programs, so that so that these findings can help other people who are in the same situation all over the world. And these findings also confirm the advantages of this kind of model of call per-service teacher education, and also the advantages of establishing closer collaboration between school and university. Okay, I think that's more or less what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. So we have time for some questions. One question? Need the mic? No, we don't need. Yeah? Do you need?
I think we need a microphone. Just one. No. Oh, so okay.
Yes. It's okay. Yeah.
So I have a question concerning the role of these presets in sharing. Did they provide some modeling for these, or were they just observing?
You mean the pre-service teachers, if they're only observing?
Because I understood that this partnership between presets.
Exactly. Easy.
So we can see that the one role had by the presets to give feedback.
Yes.
But were they also providing, were the presets providing some kind of model?
Yes. Yes, definitely, definitely. And this was also very important for our pre-service teachers. They observed the in-service in practice, so how they use technology. For example, one of the pre-service teachers wrote a long text about a critical incident in which the teacher came to the classroom and was supposed to use an interactive whiteboard and prepared a whole lesson based on that, and the interactive whiteboard didn't work. And the teacher had prepared her whole lesson based on that. And he found it fascinating how this teacher managed to overcome this challenge and have a plan B and could still manage to to design, to implement a successful lesson, even though the technology didn't work. Because this was one of the problems for my students. Sometimes I teach the whole seminar, and then afterwards I ask them, especially those who don't do the school-based project, I ask them, do you think you're going to use technology later on? I don't think so. In the beginning, I think no, maybe 5 years after I start, and things like that. And they say one of the reasons is because they think the technology might not work, and then they will be there not knowing what to do. And for this specific student, he said, she managed to do it. She did it. So this is an example for me that you need to have a plan B somehow, and it's not the end of the world if something doesn't work. So he had to see that in a real classroom to believe that this is possible. So I think it's very important in this project that the mentors also use technology and show good examples of how to teach with technology, and then they can see them in action. So this is important. And sometimes this is not always the case. Sometimes there are mentors who just want to offer their classrooms to the pre-service teachers, and these are not the ideal cases. I always try to talk to the mentors, and I try to choose the mentors that can work better with the students, but there are cases when the in-service teachers do not want to, they're afraid of technology, or do not want to make mistakes in front of the students. So I would say, if you would think of a principle or guideline for this kind of project, that you would choose mentors who are in a position to model as well. So this is very important, and that's why we are, in our university, we are bringing mentors to the university to train them, educate them, provide professional development for them so that they can help our teachers. So this is very important. This is a big discussion. Our colleagues are sometimes a bit upset. Are we teaching pre-service or in-service? It's not always easy, but this is very important to train them or to educate them. Yes, okay. Thank you for your question. Yeah, have to, we have to. Yes, because this is doesn't sound very realistic, and this is a very important question, because you might be wondering, oh, this is a great idea, and I would love to do that, but is this realistic enough? Is this possible? In our case, because we have this close collaboration with schools, this is easier, but we always have to offer something in exchange. So, for example, we offer, first of all, our teachers, our pre-service teachers, they have a technological know-how, so they go to the classrooms, to the schools, and they sometimes provide training, technological training to the teachers. So we provide this kind of support to them. Shona and I are developing a video conferencing project, French pupils interacting with German pupils in English as lingua franca by video conferencing. And we need a primary school teacher in Germany, a primary school teacher in France. This teacher, I've been working with her for quite some time. She has welcomed our students for support in this video conferencing project. Without our students, she wouldn't be able to do the project. She wouldn't be able to design all the materials, because she needs our students who have this technological know-how. So they also benefit from our students who are supporting, right? Apart from that, I also sometimes bribe them or use some incentives. So for example, for this teacher, specific teacher, I give books, I do all kinds of things. For this teacher, no, sorry, not all kinds of things, but, oh my goodness. For example, I managed to get the English department to fund her trip to France to visit the school where we're doing the video conferencing, and then she could go to France, and Shona managed to get the accommodation. So this teacher gets some things, some kind of incentives from us, and as a result, we have maybe 2 students going to work with her every semester. So it's a great thing to have her. Right? So I have to make sure this teacher is working with us, and because she's good. So it can become realistic, especially if the university is involved and really does something together with us. So it's not extremely easy, but it can be done. So yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. In the US, they have specific schools that are kind of connected to the universities, teacher training institutions. I don't know what they are called, but my colleague Andreas Müller-Hartmann always talked about these schools. What are they called? So they have a specific terminology. You have a specific terminology for this kind of schools that like schools connected to the teacher colleges, and these schools are used for this type of purpose, for example, so that you could have more of those schools that have a strong connection with teacher colleges, so that these schools could be the place where they would go. And you wouldn't have to do it individually, the way that I have been doing at the moment. Okay? Yeah, yeah. So. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 So it's 4 o'clock, and I think Shona is. Yes. Thank you very much.
Now our next presenter today is Shona Whyte, Dr. Shona Whyte. Nice. Nice, sorry, yes, Nice. It's nice in Nice. Yes, it is. Well, Dr. Shona Whyte is a fantastic teacher. She is. And, well, you should have seen her yesterday when she talked about
I told her all about it last night. So.
With passion, with enthusiasm. But she's also a researcher and also on several publications into interactive technologies, also interactive whiteboard, also a good example here. Teacher education, second language acquisition, so a very wide field for research. Well, she's also a participant and a leader of a few European projects, like public translation, that's one project as well, interactive technologies again. And, well, personally, I know Shona as a person who's a fantastic curator, so she's the one who always manages to be ahead of it in terms of new technological solutions. You should have seen her Cutrim page. She's full of fantastic resources, so just Google her name and Cutrim and you'll find there, you can follow her ideas, I always do. She's extremely tactically minded, so whenever I watch her present, I always learn something new, and I'm genuinely looking forward to these presentations. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, after that is going to be a disappointment. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for inviting me here. This is my first time in Poland. This is my first keynote speech, and also the abstract that I wrote for Joanna for this conference is now the backbone of a book, which I am about to finish writing as well. So lots of impetus, inspiration for this conference. I'm very pleased to be here. I have a very long title for you, but before I get going, my job is to get you to the coffee break, so maybe I will give you a little chance to think of other things. I find that people, if I criticize myself when I'm in the audience, I often waste a little time listening to the speaker's accent and trying to figure out where they're from and what they've been doing. So my accent is Scottish. I trained in the States, and I have been at the University of Nice for the past 20 years, drinking wine and tanning on the beach. So I managed to cobble together a few things to tell you today, but I might spend most of my time on the beach there. So my topic today, developmental framework for teacher adoption of interactive technologies. As Euline mentioned, we've been working on a project on interactive whiteboards. So this is more information about this kind of technology. Can I ask briefly how many people have perhaps observed a class with an interactive whiteboard? Oh, not so many. Anybody actually taught with an interactive whiteboard? Anybody touched one? No? Okay. So I'm not going to say you should teach with one. I'm not even going to talk very much about the details of it, but just to know a little bit who's in the audience. So what I'm interested in the area of research is the acquisition and the learner. My background is second language acquisition. I'm really interested in what happens inside our heads when we're learning to speak a second language. In order to find out what's happening inside people's heads, I'm willing to look at the interaction, to see what happens between learners, what happens between learners and teachers. And in order to do that, I'm also willing to look at the context of the classroom, in our case here, and the technology that we use here. This is what I'm really interested in. But in order to observe interesting things, I find that I need to take a step back and look at other aspects of what's happening, look at what we need to do in order to facilitate interaction and acquisition in the classroom. And that can involve observing teachers, it can involve working with them on reflective practice, perhaps action research. That will be the focus of my talk today. But here's the area where I find a little bit more trouble. How can we get from what is happening in the classroom, what the teacher's doing, what we see as researchers, out to other teachers such as yourselves, teacher educators, and researchers in general. So this is my problem, if you like, the puzzle that I have in my research. I would like to be able to communicate more effectively the things that I have learned in the classroom. So for that reason also, I'm happy to be here today. A couple things though then within this, if you'd rather, let me show you the, oh sorry, little problem again. Okay, so this is maybe not such an interesting way of looking at the recursive nature of what's going on. I found this little kitten picture which shows perhaps more clearly how everything is interconnected. That's the learner, the little black cat in the middle. The teacher is behind them, and the researcher, teacher, educator even behind them. We're all doing the same things, and the questions we might ask in call research are, what learning opportunities are we offering the learners in the classroom? How do the teachers view these opportunities? And how can we research this context, and what conclusions can we find from that? So I find that all these things have very clear links. But before I get into the meat of the subject, I also like to mention another point that I think I myself and perhaps the field in general has a little trouble with. And that I use the metaphor of pencil sharpening, which means postponing the good things. Before you get down and write, before you get down to work, you make sure your pencil is nice and ready to go. And it's my contention that in terms as teachers, as learners, as researchers, we often postpone the good stuff that we know is important because for various reasons. So often teachers will say we can't really interact because the learners are too young, they're only beginners, they have to learn some vocabulary and grammar first. And so we do the boring stuff that's not so good because we believe that this needs to be done first. In terms of teacher training, teacher education, we also have an idea that their teachers aren't so good, they don't speak such good English, they haven't had access to modern methodology, so they can't do this fun stuff that you would like them to do because they're not ready. And we also often wait until the technology works. And you know, and I know that if we wait till it works, we will never start, okay? So part of my argument today will be, let's just jump in, let's try, let's see what can happen, because for pragmatic reasons, it won't work otherwise, but also for reasons related to my research, and I hope I'll be able to show you that today. So I have a very classic plan for you. I'm going to talk about this iTilt project on interactive whiteboards, a little bit of background. I'm going to tell you about how the teachers in the project used the interactive whiteboard. Very briefly, if you want to look at this, we have a couple papers already that you can read about that. Then I'm going to talk more in detail about teacher cognition, what the teachers believe affect how they teach, and how this develops through projects like this. And in the end, I'm going to offer you a developmental framework, which I hope can be applied to other contexts, other technologies, how teachers tend to develop from starting off with technology through gaining more experience and coming on to fluent and innovative technology users. So The project is called iTilt, a European-funded project that I worked on with Euline, Cutrim, Schmid, and a number of other partners in different countries. There's the website there, open access. If you're interested, go and have a look. 7 countries were involved in the project. We worked in 6 languages, 4 different educational sectors because it was lifelong learning. So we had primary, secondary, vocational and university. We went into the classroom, we filmed the teachers using the interactive whiteboard. We made little short clips which we then put on the website for other people to use with some commentary from the learners and the teachers. And what I'm going to talk about is the research that we conducted during, alongside and within this project. So, interactive whiteboard, if you haven't had a chance to see one in action, it has 3 parts. You have the touch-sensitive display that you can see there. You have the video projector that will be either on the ceiling, it could be on the table, it could be fixed to the board if you're lucky. And then you have the computer, which again may be on the board, maybe somewhere else. And the important part of the computer is that it has specific software on it that we use with the interactive whiteboard. And the downside of that, since we should also mention the drawbacks, separate software for each board. So you need to know the make of your board and the software that goes with it. Anyway, it's not the purpose of my talk today to talk too much about how to use the interactive whiteboard for teaching. If you are interested in this for your own teaching or for teacher education, you can visit the website, which is itilt.eu. If you're interested more in what research has shown about this tool, because people have a few doubts about this, people have a feeling that the interactive whiteboard will reinforce teacher-centered and teacher-directed teaching, and this is probably not what we want to see in the classroom. There's a very interesting article by Hennessy in London that came out last year in the course of a project which was looking at use of digital technologies in Italian schools. And they have a very interesting overview of the past 10 years of research, not just in languages, but in other areas of using the interactive whiteboard, and a lot of interesting insights that are very relevant to us. But let me now talk about our project then. So this is the French part of the iTilt project, looking at interactive whiteboards for communicative language use. So I had 9 teachers, 4 primary, 2 lower secondary, 2 upper secondary, and 1 university teacher. They were in the project as actors in the classroom. We had university teachers, mainly myself, and some graduate students, a research assistant who worked in the program. And we used this action research cycle where we had a question. Our question was, how can we use this tool in communicative ways in the language classroom? We got some data, we analysed, reflected on the data, and then we tried to act. We tried to change, and then we looked again. So a cyclical approach to research. Here's the plan. This is the part where I try to convince you it's very serious. Here's what we did. We designed a training, we implemented the training, and then we visited the classrooms twice. So we filmed entire class sessions, and we interviewed the learners. But we also interviewed the teachers. We gave them a copy of the film from the classroom. We each looked at this film separately, and we came back together to do video-stimulated reflective interviews, as in Euline's project she mentioned earlier. From these interviews, we selected the videos for the website, and then we created this resource. So during this project, then, we had these different steps of data collection, the filming, the looking, the reflecting on it. And we also had questionnaires before and afterwards to find out what people were thinking and to see how they developed. And we had this collaborative action research cycle, as I mentioned, where we get the data, we talk about it, we think about it, and we have the second round of data collection where we see what happens there. I was also working with teachers who were in different areas. There was not one of the 9 teachers in the same school, the same village, the same city even as the other teachers. And so we've met at 3 points during the project, after the first data collection period, after the second one, and then again when we were piloting the website, to bring them together, to show them examples of their practice before the website was ready, to show them examples of practice in different countries, and we also used that as a data collection opportunity to hear what they thought about looking at themselves, looking at colleagues, and looking at people a little further afield. So lots of data, which I'm now going to try and put together for you now. The background I can go quickly through because Euline has already mentioned all the names that you need. Task-based language teaching, so communicative, task-based, this is what we're basically using at the moment. Interestingly, it's one point where researchers and official program makers seem to be in agreement. This is what they would like us to teach, and this is what I think would be good for us to teach. So it's a happy accident, I think. Going to talk about teacher efficacy, which has already been mentioned. A little bit about technology integration, because quite a lot of research has been done on that. And then situated learning, which I think you mentioned, but not so much. Okay, so task-based language teaching, the ELLIS framework that you know, the Common European Framework for languages. I'm going to be talking about the difference that Breen makes in a paper in the 80s between task as work plan, the design of the task, which we want to be authentic, realistic, making sense to the learners, and task in progress, what happens when we implement that very task. So I'll be looking at the goals of the task, how we look at the language that's used, and then what the outcome is. Do we judge the outcome of the task on how well the learners use the language, how accurate they are, or do we judge the outcome in terms of appropriateness? Are they doing the task? Are they doing what we wanted them to do? And I'll be talking about differences between whether an activity was quite task-oriented or where it was more a pedagogical exercise, so more the classical thing that we see and that many of us would like to see less of in the classrooms, where we just have a grammar exercise or some questions in the book, or things that we're doing because it's on page 25 rather than because we have a reason for it. So that's the framework we're looking at. Teacher efficacy, I don't need to worry about now. Beliefs about the capabilities to exercise control of their own level of functioning and over events that affect our lives. So if we have high efficacy, it's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. We believe that we can change, so we try harder. When things don't work so well, we keep going longer. So it's good to have. In terms of teachers' self-efficacy, it's your judgment about your ability to make the learners learn. So we measured that in this study and got some kind of interesting results. But before we get to that, let me talk to you a little bit about technology integration. So the oldest and probably the most still developed model that we have is the Davis one, the technology acceptance model, where he talks about the difference between the perceived usefulness of a tool and the ease of use. And I have developed some ideas about that through working with teachers. Generally what we do is try to convince people it will be easy. We say, look, here's the interactive whiteboard, you can get started, you can do these things, it will save you time, it will be good for you. And then when they run into technological problems and technical difficulties, then they're depressed and they'd say, well, you told us it would be easy. And it's like, well, when it works, it is easy. And I think this actually is an error. And I have now changed my strategy and I try to work on the perceived usefulness side of the equation. So I say, if you want to use this board, yes, it will be difficult. You will have to spend some time. You've got to learn this software. It won't work and you have to learn how to plug in the cables and you have to have a plan B and all these things. But there are things that you can do with this technology that you could not do otherwise, and then I try to persuade them that these things are good and that these things are useful. So I'm working on this side of the equation. Because in fact, the IWB, if you're thinking about it, it's something you can start with really easily. It's something that you can use to teach exactly how you teach now, which is why it has been so well accepted. You can use it for any type of teaching. But if you're going to use it well, it takes some time and it's a bit of investment. So I think it's fairer to be upfront with that, and people need to think that they're going to get something out of it that they could not get otherwise. Otherwise, there's no reason for starting. So we have different developmental frameworks that people have looked at, basically moving from the left as beginners over to the right as fluent experts, super users, if you like. So the earliest framework is Beecham 2004. He looked at beginners who used the interactive whiteboard just as a nice white space to project something, moving all the way through to synergistic users who let the learners come to the board, who had spontaneous things inside a planned lesson and so on. So different ways of looking at different parameters that we can look at. Do we let the learners touch the board? Is it only the teacher who does it? Are we using it only for technical reasons? Do we just let them move something? Or is there some kind of pedagogical interactivity going on? And we'll come back to that in a minute. Once I've talked to you a little bit about situated learning. So in Euline's questions, she was asked how does it work institutionally in getting the teachers to cooperate in the project? How does it work? It is something that's difficult to make work, and I think when it does work, it's because the teachers who are involved in the project are able to work with each other and to get extra things from working together with each other rather than official things from the institution or even from me. And so the situated learning, Lavie and Wenger 91, I don't know if this is in your in your habits. Community of practice, so informal ways of learning. They were looking at workplace learning, where people learning when they are not even aware of learning. So we do it when we have a shared purpose, when we want to do things together. And the notion here that's important for me is the notion of legitimate peripheral participation. So we have this group that's there, and you start out on the outside. You're not an expert when you come to learn to use the board. You participate only peripherally. You listen to what's going on, you learn from other people, and as you become a fuller member of the group, this is evidence of you learning to use, in our case, the interactive whiteboard. So this will come up a little bit as we go through. So that's the background. Now I'm going to talk about the use of the board. So this is a little bit technical. I'm not giving you the tables where we counted all aspects of which tools they used and so on. I'm just going to give you the big picture. If you're interested in the articles, they're definitely there. They're even open access. So first thing we looked at was what are the tools and features of the board that the learners used. And there are two ways you can use the board. You can use objects that you embed in the files before you start teaching, and then you can do things in the classroom. And we found that our teachers had a balance between things that were already in the page and things that you did in class. And we think this is a good thing, because if you have lots of stuff on the board in the file that you don't exploit, then probably you're spending too much time preparing. And if, on the other hand, you don't have anything on the page, then maybe you don't need an interactive whiteboard. So we think that having a balance here is a good thing. We also found, though, that they had a limited range of tools. They used the simplest tools, and they focused on the very basic features, images and sounds, and using the pen. So we felt that the teachers in our project, who actually had varying levels of experience, some were complete novices and some had 2, 3, even 5 years of experience, they didn't use everything that was possible in the board. However, we did find that they were very happy to let the learners use the board. We were a little worried that we would have a lot of examples of the teachers using the board, and in fact our teachers were very ready to let the learners go. But they didn't just let the learners go and get on with it. They designated individual learners to come to the board. So they still stayed very much in control of the sessions. In terms of language teaching objectives, we looked at whether they were teaching listening or speaking or reading or writing, or sub-skills like grammar and spelling and so on. And we found that there was quite a balanced use of skills and sub-skills. There was more speaking and writing than reading and speaking and listening than reading and writing, probably because we had 4 primary teachers in the project who weren't really using reading and writing at all. There was a strong focus on vocabulary, again, probably for this same reason, and not very much use of grammar. And in terms of task orientation, which I mentioned in the background, there was a general preference for pedagogical exercises. So we didn't have this communicative use that we were hoping for, and that was very prominent in our training materials. We found that some teachers had task-like goals, but that they generally still focused on the accuracy of the language rather than other features of the task. So we had a fairly... So our conclusions are the following, that the teachers, the 9 teachers in this project, used a limited range of very basic features, that they tried to teach oral skills and vocabulary, and they generally had 1 individual learner at the board at a time. And what their main form of activity was the pedagogical exercise. So we could say that this was a fairly cautious, conservative, circumscribed use of the interactive whiteboard. And now we want to know, why was this? Were there differences between teachers? Did people develop over the time? So we want to look a little bit more at what they're thinking about in order to explain. So I'm into my teacher cognition part. And this is kind of the more fun part too, because this is where we tried to understand where the teachers were at in their development and what they thought about their development. So we had pre and post questionnaires where we asked them about their levels of confidence with ICT in general and with the IWB. So we were able to have them say at the beginning of the board, I'm really confident using the internet to find materials for the interactive whiteboard, or I have no idea how to embed sound in an interactive whiteboard file. So we had a measure at the beginning, we had the same questionnaire at the end, so we can measure development. We also had used questionnaires when the teachers came together to watch the videos of each other. And these were a really interesting source of information. So the teachers watched either at home or in the computer lab, and they answered They put some comments on what they thought, and then they discussed it together. We also had these focus group discussions, which were very interesting. And then again, to compensate for this problem of the teachers not knowing each other very well and being in geographically remote areas, we created a circle on Google+, and we were very proud of this because this was the first time we could use it. It was only in beta, and we managed to set up a circle where we had the project researchers, the graduate students, and all the teachers in the project, and we asked them to make little videos, to post links, to basically communicate with each other. I think if I were doing it now, I'd probably do it on Facebook because that's really where things are happening, but at the time we thought the Google Plus circle was a good idea, and it worked not too badly. So the teachers would make little videos where they'd explain. Sometimes we asked them questions. What's the most surprising thing that's happening with your board? What problems have you been having, and so on. And they made little videos either with us or at home, and they posted them and they commented on each other. And so this again is data. And one of my measures of how involved the teachers were in the project was how much they participated in this circle. So another little diagram. You're still holding out before coffee, yeah. So I measured project engagement by how much they came to these meetings and how much they posted on our circle. I measured their efficacy beliefs with my pre and post questionnaire, and I measured experience and access with the same questionnaire. And I found, as you usually do in these groups, that people participated to greater or lesser degree and were more or less confident in the project. And I actually got a nice little pattern where I had 3 people who were on the outside, so peripheral participants in the project. Teachers C, G, and I. One was primary, one was university, and one was upper secondary. And these people participated less than the others in the project and, as we might predict, showed less development in their practice. Interestingly, the teacher C was her first year of teaching. She had many other things going on. She had inspections. She had many things to do. She wasn't able to give us enough time. Teacher G was about to retire. He very heroically volunteered to participate in the project, but obviously he wasn't thinking about what he could be doing with the board next year. Teacher I had other fish to fry also. The second group, semi-peripheral participants I called them, they showed a lot of technical development. So these people were engaged, they came on the project, not as much as my super users that are coming up in a minute, but they were there. They commented that the difference between them and the ones who were really fully engaged with the project is that they were focusing very much on organizational issues with the project, with practical details of how to make things work, and with technical problems. But they all made a lot of progress with the technical aspects of the tool. So at the beginning they said, we don't know what any of these tools are, and at the end they said, I can use all these, I'm very confident. And it seems to me that this had an effect on their development. They were concentrating so much on the technical aspect that they didn't have space, a bit like some of Euline's learners in her examples, didn't have space to think about the rest. The 3 that made the most progress in my view, or got closest to the kind of innovative practice that we might hope for with the new tools, were teachers B, D, and F. There were 2 primary and 1 lower secondary. And they were core participants in the project because they came on Google Plus a lot, and when they posted videos, they touched on a lot of different topics. So they talked about themselves as teachers, other teachers, teaching in itself. They talked about learners and learning. They talked about all different areas, showing that this is what they were reflecting on. Teacher D is the real star. She was the one who went from not very task-based teaching to very task-based teaching. So she really changed her practice. The other 2 didn't change their practice so much, but definitely showed signs of reflecting, showed signs of wanting to do different things in the classroom. And I don't think we can ask for much more than that. So, in the final focus group, this was a really good opportunity for them to take a step back and say, what did you learn from the project? What do you think about the board now in terms of creating opportunities for language learning? They came up with 4 main areas that they thought were important, and people were more or less positive, more or less negative about these things. So absolutely everybody said it was good for motivation. And this is after a whole year, so we know there's a wow effect, and whenever you start teaching with something new, people are automatically motivated. But these teachers said it tends to be maintained. When I put the interactive whiteboard on, everybody's eyes look, this is a good thing. And some of the teachers said, yeah, but if we're doing group work with only one group at the board, it's a bit distracting because it's the loudest, it's the brightest thing, so little drawback there. In terms of efficiency, everybody agreed it was nice to have things all in one place, that you could prepare things, you could reuse them, that there were gains to be made there. On the downside, of course, you waste time because sometimes it won't work, because your software doesn't work, all these problems that we know. They also said flexibility was something that was important for them, that they could use the tool for all different ages and levels, and that they could use it for different teaching purposes. So everyone thought that that was useful. Some of them said it was good because you could accommodate unexpected activities, unexpected events in the classroom. You could deal with them in the way that you couldn't if you had a PowerPoint, for example. And in terms of professional development, I put all the bigger things in this last category here. Interestingly, they said that using the board made it more likely they would share with other teachers. And something I didn't expect at all was the teachers, particularly those core teachers in the middle there, they'd started becoming advocates of technological innovation. They're talking about it with their colleagues. They were trying to persuade teachers who they saw as reluctant technology, who perhaps were a little afraid of technology. They were trying to persuade them to come on in, the water's lovely, you know, we can do these things. So let me just show you a few examples here. We seem to be all right for time, so I can perhaps slow down a little bit. So examples of the motivation. Teacher F says, so she's secondary school teacher, she says, I always have 25 hands up whenever I want someone to come to the board. They're really enthusiastic about it. Every single teacher had something like that. People also wondered if this was necessarily a good thing. Teacher A, also primary teacher, said, there are tools that are fabulous, but will the IWB really make them learn English better? I'm not so sure. And so she had an idea. She was a little more positive than that. She said, if you teach with flashcards in a traditional way, or if you teach with an interactive whiteboard, she says probably the pupils will remember the same vocabulary. They will have the same learning outcome, if you like. She said, but their experience will be different. The ones who had the IWB will enjoy it well. It will enjoy it better. So this was her experience with the board. Teacher H, upper secondary school teacher, much more negative. She said, it's obviously a very big defeat for the classical idea of learning by rote, learning pattern drills. I can sit here and concentrate on this, and later on that will be beneficial for me. So she was nostalgic for the days when students had that attitude. They would sit in her high school English classroom and they would think, I'll concentrate, I'll memorize, and later on I will get some gratification. And she says, but you know, we have to live with the times. So someone who's using this technology because she feels it's expected of her, but with really severe doubts about communicative methodology, and even about the necessity of using technology in the first place. And so this obviously is going to have an effect on how the tool is implemented in the classroom and how far the teacher is willing to persevere in terms of efficacy, how far she's prepared to go in order to get the outcomes that she would like to see. Efficiency then, so as we said, everybody thought that this was great. So teacher H, although she had doubts about the board, she said, yeah, it saves paper, it makes it more generally interactive. It gets them intercorrecting much more. This recently came in very handy. She gave a detailed explanation of an activity they did in class. She said they could really help each other. It would have been very laborious on paper. So it did allow her to do something. This is the perceived usefulness argument. It allowed her to do something that she could not have done otherwise. And so she said it's a big advantage. Another advantage, teacher C was using the board to show the children in a primary classroom what they would do when they went to different places in the classroom to do station work. So when you go to the computer, here's what you will see and here's what we will do. And she said you can show it once what to do for all of them. Because even those who are staying with me at the IWB, they're going to the computer eventually, so I like to show them on the IWB what to do. So another question of efficiency here. Teacher A says, it's a problem for me because it's a very marvelous material, but we can't use it for the moment correctly because we don't have the time. And so the teachers who made technical progress but not pedagogical progress were the ones who tended to complain about lack of time and to say that they just would like to have more time to devote to this complex tool and they didn't have it in their daily lives. Flexibility then, what do they mean when they say we like flexibility? They say, Teacher E says, the whole variety of things you can do with an IWB, going from the simplest use of the pen with all its colours, highlighters and shapes, to a real interactive document that you can present to the kids, and then they can make it theirs with all the interactive stuff you can do with the board. So a real idea that you could have different levels of interactivity, from technical to pedagogical interactivity, that she was discovering. She was a novice user at the beginning. She had lower secondary pupils. Another argument here about flexibility, and interestingly, because we see two teachers who had not understood the affordances of the interactive whiteboard in the same way. So teacher F, one of these very experienced teachers who made progress in her pedagogical thinking throughout the project, said, I can prepare all I need for my teaching unit in the same file, but at the same time it still leaves me a huge part of freedom. I can always change anything at the last minute or even during the lesson. I can always change my mind or adapt the activity to the students. So this is what we would like our tools to allow us to do. Allow us to implement a plan that we have so that we can attain our learning objectives, our teaching and learning objectives, but also something that leaves space for the learners so they don't feel they're being processed through an activity, so that if they do say something, it can be taken on board, it can be used, it can be incorporated into the lesson. And this is something that, if you're not familiar with interactive whiteboards, for me it's one of the big selling points. So while you're working on the board, you don't have to come out of display mode in order to change things. So I can add something directly here on the board and everyone can see it. I can add an extra page, so it's like adding an extra slide, and this makes a difference to the learners. If they know that you can write down what they say, they're much more likely to participate than if they know that it's just going to be another slide and whatever answer you give, I'm going to carry on in my idea. So this teacher saw the flexibility. The other one said, you have to think before what you're going to do and do it very carefully, because when you begin, it's impossible to correct when you're doing the thing. Because it's done on the IWB, so you're obliged to go on with what is going on. You can't correct. When you have flashcards, if you have an idea that something is wrong in your plan, you can correct it. In the IWB, you can't. So this teacher had not been able to exploit the possibility of the interactive whiteboard. She actually used the software to import PowerPoints, which then still had interactivity on them, but she hadn't taken the extra step of creating the materials directly with the interactive whiteboard software. And so she had this misperception, in my view, of what you can do with the board that was kind of holding her back a little bit. And the last area, which is most interesting, because this is perhaps the most open part of the project, where teachers really tell you what they think, and you can't really predict how they're going to see it as fitting in with their practice. So teacher B, one of the ones who went furthest in my view, she says, English is the only subject where I do workstations. So workstations being, you have perhaps three groups in the classroom doing 3 different activities, and then the students move around, so that by the end of the hour, everyone has had a go on all the different activities. And she said, English is the only subject where I do workstations. When I use the board in French or mathematics, it's collective. It's interactive, but whole class. And I'm thinking of next year, because every year I change something, perhaps in mathematics, one day every week, I'll do workstations in mathematics. So she's seeing links between what she does with the interactive whiteboard for language teaching to other subjects that she's teaching. Teacher A, still worried about not having enough time to do these things. So you can see how people feel, how comfortable they feel with the technology, what kind of success they're having. This impacts on how willing they are to invest time. And we also have your orientation again. This is the other upper secondary school teacher. And he said, I had one kid who said to me, I'm not going to take a literary option for my end of high school exams, because my God, you have to read books. And I think that might be a negative point of all these screens. The screen is also, you know, something you don't want to see, right? You hide behind a screen. We have to be very careful, I find, about the use of all this new technology. So like the other upper secondary school teacher, this teacher had really core doubts about the value of using technology in the classroom, the problems this might have for other learning, for traditional learning, and this is obviously going to stop him from really wanting to develop with technology. So unless he can find a way to use technology that still allows him to meet these other goals he has, he's not going to want to go further. And here's an unexpected part for me. This teacher was a novice teacher at the beginning, and she said, we didn't say, okay, this is going to help me analyze my teaching. Not at all. That came after. So when she came to participate in the project, her idea was we would teach her how to use the board, and she would learn how to switch it on, how to do the different things with it. And she realized at the end of the project that, in fact, it had made her reevaluate her practice. It had made her think about pedagogical issues, and she was not expecting this. So I wasn't particularly expecting it either, so I was happy to see this happening. And in the focus group, we got some really interesting discussions. So again, Euline, you talked about the value of working with in-service teachers and pre-service teachers, and then with you at the university, where it's all people talking with one learner. What I find interesting in this project is when the teachers talk to each other, because they had things to say that didn't necessarily have to go by me, and which would help them pursue other goals that I was not necessarily aware of. So, as I mentioned, they began to say, we're using this tool, it's really good. Let's see if we can get more people in our institution using this, other teachers trying to encourage them. So one teacher saying, I showed my friend how to use this and showed him that he didn't have to make new materials, he could use them with this interactive whiteboard. And then she said, and my idea was that once this person got started, he would say, what else can I do? What's this and what's that? And he would get interested in the tool. And a lot of teachers in the group, when we were talking about that, go, yeah, we're going to want to go further. Of course, that's exactly what I mean. They're getting kind of excited. It's intriguing, you get drawn in. So the idea that we start using the tool, we have some success, and we want to go further. But one teacher says, not me. I'm only doing this. That's all I'm doing. And so it goes on, really interesting. So the motivated teacher goes, really? And she goes, I could never find time to go further. I know that now. Is that right? Oh, it's very useful because I save things, but that's all I do. I never use any of the other functionalities. Still keen, still wants to keep her going. She says, maybe later in another school. And she says, somewhere I had access to training with someone. So this is a teacher who'd just been involved in a 14-month project with 9 other teachers, 4 research assistants, me, all visiting her in her classroom, filming her, talking with her about her practice, sharing films of other people using it, all with the goal of making a teacher education resource. And she says, I don't have access to training. So I found this extremely interesting that she would not consider this as a training opportunity. And I think this is where the community of practice comes in. So the idea that she's not officially invited to an official training session by her hierarchy, which says, now we're having 3 hours on the interactive whiteboard and you get off class and you do this. Because it's on your own time, because it's parallel to your own secondary school teaching situation, it doesn't count as training. And so I'm not going to invest any further. So interesting for me. Now we come to the framework. We're probably ready to get to the end here. So just again, probably too detailed. You can look at the slides later if you're interested. But there are different number of variables that we need to think about in terms of teachers' development. It's not the case that you have one beginner who knows nothing, who is not pedagogically advanced and not technically advanced, and then at the end you have a super user who's brilliant in everything. Everyone comes in at different areas and everyone moves along the different dimensions at a different rate. So we have, in terms of efficacy, people have low efficacy beliefs at the beginning, moving on to expert levels at the end. In terms of access, we have 2 types of access. Does the teacher themselves have access to the board? If you're ever training people with the board, this is a really important determining factor. You need to have access all the time. So the teachers who had limited access or only intermittent access, who didn't have long-term access, were much less likely to engage with the project and to make progress. There's also the question of access to the board by learners. So teachers tended to use the board themselves at the beginning till they felt confident. Then they would let other learners, just one. Then they would maybe let a group work together. And we didn't really see this in the project. Our teachers were all near the left end of the spectrum, if you like. We would hope to see more synergistic use at the end, where there's unplanned use, where some learner comes up and says, let me show you this. Similarly, we can look at the use. People tended to start off with the pen, maybe not even software for the interactive whiteboard, moving on to very sophisticated use of the interactive software and other media. and a balance between something planned and something spontaneous. So we need both here. If you're just going to do spontaneous things, probably the IWB software is not particularly useful because you can plan lots of things there. But if you're only going to do things planned, you may as well use PowerPoint because then it's all fixed. So somewhere in between there. And then the question of reflective practice, I think this is what helps me distinguish at the end from teachers who seem to be engaged but make only limited progress, and teachers who were very engaged and made a lot of progress. What are you focusing on when you reflect? Are you focusing on the practical side of things? Are you thinking about the technical side? Are you thinking more about the teaching? Are you thinking about how you can change, how you can do things differently? And that was the one that made the difference for me in the end in terms of what happened in the classroom. So you're probably ready for a cup of coffee. Let me get through the last couple here. What does it mean? I always want to ask this question when I listen to other people's presentations. What does it mean for me? So I'm back to my model of what's interesting to me, the interaction, the teacher working, and then what this has for research, how we can pass it on to other people. What does it mean then for classroom interaction, for the learner, for the use of technology, for teaching, for teacher education, and for research? I have 5 little takeaways for you. See what you think. The first thing I suggest is that we need to leave some space for the learners, that you shouldn't over-prepare your materials, and that we should implement tasks. So not just design tasks, but implement them and following them all the way through. In terms of technology, don't wait to read the manual. Don't do it. You'll never have time to read it. It will never work. You're sharpening pencils if you're reading the manual. Yeah, just find out how to do 3 things. Find out where the back button is, you know, the Control Z when it's gone wrong. That's all you need. And then another thing, to focus on what's interesting for you. No, not necessarily problems, but questions or puzzles. This is an action research approach to things. So you focus on what you want to do, what's not working for you, or what you would like to change, not on the tool itself. Yeah, you're going to have to spend time figuring out the tool, but you will persevere and have more success if you know why you're doing it. Another thing that was humbling for me in the project, after having spent enormous amount of time and energy counselling, advising, training teachers, they said, actually, it's really good if we could just watch other teachers. We don't need you so much. We would just like to watch these videos of people in other classrooms teaching because we don't get this in our practice. So this is something that I think is good, good practice for projects, for teacher education, for research also. Let the teachers watch each other, let them talk to each other, and don't consider that everything has to happen in an official training course. And then the last thing, a little bit of advice to myself, I suppose, that we should involve teachers as agents and reflective practitioners. They're not mice in a lab that we are studying to see what happens in their context. They are agents. They are people who are doing things for particular reasons. And if we involve them in the definition of the questions, in the gathering of data and analysing of it, it kind of saves us a step. We don't have to wait. We've analysed everything and published it and then made it simple into a PowerPoint so that we can give it in training sessions. It can all happen organically and people have a much better, more personalised understanding of it. And on that optimistic note, I will leave you there. There's the little link if you want to look at my references. I just put them online because I thought it was easier. And these are my various addresses. Thank you for your attention. We can have questions over coffee if you like. I can see people looking like they could do with a little break. Ask your little question. Yes. Yes, maybe not the interactive whiteboard per se, because I think there are other technologies, and I think we're running up almost. I'm interested to hear that you have lots of boards in Poland, even if people aren't using them. There are some countries that are still developing, and other countries where they're saying, now we want mobile technology, we're moving over to iPads and so on. So the IWB manufacturers are making strenuous efforts to design software that allows us to integrate the mobile technology. And incidentally, I think there will always be a place for some kind of large-scale display, otherwise why are we in classrooms? classrooms, right? Even if you're working on on mobile devices and tablets, you're still going to need somewhere to do it. So I think it's interesting. But where we see these things are going is, so this was, we train people to use the tool and then we try and see how they use it. And because we saw such a circumscribed use of the tool, we thought maybe what we need to do is more task support, more help with designing a task that we think will be helpful for the learners, and then task implementation. So you have a good idea, how can we make it work? And so this is one of the reasons we started the video conferencing project, because video conferencing is something that is supposed to involve live communication, be interactive, something that you can't plan and memorize in advance. And so we thought that this would be a useful continuation of this type of work. And then also looking with the same research design, because we really found the research design to be helpful to observe the teachers, to have their observation on it, and then go in for a second time. So we would like to conduct further studies, but using other technologies as well. So maybe using smartphones, iPads, but with this same idea that we would like to create something to share, and that we would like to involve the teachers in the creation of these materials. This is my big question, like how do we reach people? Because I've obviously been doing training, so we have this website where there's 250 little videos in different languages, and you want to show it to pre-service teachers, to in-service teachers, and say, hey, what can we do with this? So your design activities where they go look at the videos, and it tends to be fairly underwhelming. They look at it and they say, we could do that without a board, or they say that's not very interactive, and it seems to be very difficult for people who are not using technology to look at use of technology and see what's in it for them and what the value is for the learners. It's a little bit analogous, I don't know if you do teacher education, when you show videos, or when teachers who have not yet taught are in the classroom at the beginning, you show them a video, they don't see what you see as an experienced teacher. They're just like, oh, she made a mistake, or look at that kid, he's sleeping. Whereas other people who are experienced teachers can see beyond the noise of the little things that didn't work to see that was a good intention. Do you see that person learning there? You can see these things. And for me, that's the big problem. How can you transfer that to distance platforms? How can you help people to see what's good in what you've produced? But I don't have an answer to that.
I have a question about those communities of practice.
Mm-hmm.
What would your suggestion be for forming such a community? I mean, the size, the dynamics, the composition of the community. Do you have an experience in this area?
Well, we've had two. The first one we did worked really well, and the second one, which was this one, worked a little less well. The first time, this is kind of confirmed in the literature, we had a training period. We had face-to-face 4 days where we worked with teachers in order to set up a video conferencing project with interactive whiteboards. So the framework was there, it was institutional, they all got time off class, they came, and I was invited along, and I went because I wanted to have these teachers for my project. So I went and I helped them, I gave them materials, we talked, we had lots of discussion, and afterwards they more or less, I set up a Google group for them, and they used it a lot more than I would have thought, because they got on very well and they liked each other, and we went out to dinner and we did things, and it worked really well, and it helped us keep in touch so that when we went to film they were able to watch each other's films, and it was really rich, and it lasted even a bit longer than we might have needed it to do for our purposes. And so I thought this would be a good way to help gel my group, and it didn't work so well for this group because I think they didn't see each other at the beginning. So I wasn't able to get everyone together. We did the training in separate places because they were in separate places and they were using different board brands. This is another little drawback of interactive whiteboards. You have to train people with the board they have, with the software they have. So we couldn't train them all together because they had 3 different kinds of boards. So this was a little snag, and it meant that things started more slowly. And we also had different levels. In the other group, they were all primary school teachers, so and they weren't all teachers of English, so they all spoke in French. Whereas here, we wanted to communicate with partners elsewhere in Europe, so we wanted it in English. I think maybe the primary school teachers were a little intimidated about their English compared to the secondary school teachers. And so these little things made it harder. What we did have that was good was we had a research assistant. I said to her, this is your job, you make this thing work. And she tried so hard, she made loads of videos. We had a happy hour on Fridays. She would sit there with a beer saying, here's what we've been doing, and she would give the news of different parts of the project, what's going on, and then she would ask them questions and people would answer and so on. But we were on there a lot more than they were. So it didn't work so well probably because we wanted too much for it to work. It came from us rather than from them. Yeah. Yeah, we did quite a lot with that. Well, we asked them. So after each filming, we took a focus group of children or learners from the classroom. So we took 4 or 5 and we interviewed them. We had semi-structured interviews. So all across the project, we asked the same questions. And for the higher level learners, for the university students and the upper high school, we got some relatively interesting reflections. For the younger learners, it was much harder. And one thing I did was I had them do a drawing of their English class with the interactive whiteboard. And these were really interesting. And in fact, Teacher D, the one who made the most progress in the project, she was a special education teacher. She had a group of children who had cognitive and behavioral difficulties for whom English wasn't even on the program. She was just motivated to do it, and so she did English with them. And at one point in the project, these children were obviously quite difficult to debrief. It was hard to get, what did you do? In fact, I sat with the board and I showed them what they'd just done in the lesson and got them to tell me what they'd done. But it was quite hard to get reactions. But their pictures were great. They had a picture of the board. I don't have one here. Picture of the board where this was a board that you couldn't touch. You needed a pen, a specific pen beside it. And the pen was about like the size of a pen. In the drawing, it was 2/3 of the height of the board, because that's the magic pen that allows you access to the board. If you don't have that pen, you can't go. And so this really showed what their view of the board was. The teacher was always enormous, but by the side. And the teacher saw this and she said, I'm too much in the middle here. It's supposed to be an interactive whiteboard. They're supposed to do it. And here all they see is me. And so based on that, she tried to change her pedagogy so that they did more and she did less. So they had a real role in that there. Exactly. These were questions that we asked the teachers. So in the project ourselves, we were a bit scared that we would get too many examples of teacher-fronted activities. So in the training sessions, we spent time showing them how they could do different things that weren't the teacher at the board. And in fact, we had it worked out about 2/3 of learn at the board and 1/3, or even a bit, it's like more like 75%. So most of the examples that we got, that we selected for the website, were one learner at the board. So that was part of our goal. And when you search the website, you can search by examples with the learner at the board, pairs of learners at the board, or groups of learners at the board, as opposed to a teacher at the board. So we were aware of that criticism, and we wanted to design the project to make it clear that there were other ways of teaching with the board. In terms of different levels and so on, everybody liked it with their learners, and in the focus group at the end, we said, what do you think, there's a particular group? And they said it's good for everyone. They thought it was, I think, often when you see pre-service secondary teachers, they think it's good for little kids and no one else. But in fact, the secondary teachers in the project, there were 4 there, and they all found a use for it. Thank you.